Hey everyone, it's Tim, and welcome back to my channel. For those of you who don't know me, I am a fantasy and science fiction author, and over the summer I published a novella called Eggs in Two Baskets, which finds itself in a similar health situation that we find ourselves from 2020 and now into 2021, depending on when you're watching this. But it involves space travel. It's mostly on Earth and then Mars later and a little in between. So if you enjoy a short, quick read that's space-based but tied to reality with a little twist of imagination, I think you'll enjoy this read. So what I want to do is I'm going to read a small section of Act 1 to you tonight. And if you like it, then feel free to go out and purchase it in paperback or ebook, whatever you like. This is actually going to be a audiobook soon. I'm working with a very talented narrator, so you'll be able to hear somebody who talks much better than myself read this to you in a very short period of time. So enjoy. After waking from her sleep rotation and purging her flight suit of its biowaste, Major Orsted adjusted her gear, reread the mission briefing, and a handful of tactical updates automatically downloaded to her computer by command back on Earth, and mentally prepared herself for the task at hand. They had tested this attack and the necessary maneuvers several times on smaller NEOs closer to the planet, but this would be the largest asteroid attempted so far. It was also the furthest that she and the rest of the flight team had ever been from home. She was confident in the abilities of their new starships and their pilots, but there was always a degree of uncertainty in these missions. Until the mission was complete and the ships were back on the tarmac on Earth, the what-ifs would incessantly gnaw at the back of her mind. Running through the menus in front of her, she was pleased to see all systems were green for both her controls and those of her two crewmates. Switching her comm to shipwide transmission, she reached out to the two women behind her. "Good morning, ladies," Major Orsted called out. "Thanks for keeping the ship on course during the night. Sit rep, please." She knew the general status of the ship's major functions and subsystems, but it was still nice to hear the human version of the story to complement the multicolored lights blinking on and off on a computer screen. With so much of her life being digitized these days, it was refreshing to hear some colloquial terms and slang thrown in every once in a while, especially with their team. The Space Force operators and flight crews were asked to put their lives on the line every day of their careers while maintaining the safety and security of the planet. As such, they were given a little more latitude than some of the other branches so long as they looked good on television and got their jobs done. What happened outside the Earth's exosphere stayed outside of the exosphere. Granted, Captain Hallberg often strayed a little too far past that boundary and erred on the side of ridiculousness at times, but he was a good man and had yet to fail a mission. Orsted continued to read the data streaming from her displays while listening to the updates from her navigator and weapons specialist. Things were looking to be in order, as expected, with this crew and their well-maintained equipment. She foresaw no reason why this morning's attack wouldn't go as planned. It also helped that they could technically do poorly on this mission and still go home relatively happy. Whatever happened today would give their scientists data to crunch regardless. They'd learn more about this asteroid, and Lockheed would get some kudos knowing that their new starships performed admirably. Then they could begin charging the U.S. government and its allies a pretty penny for the fighters. Hearing her lieutenant come to the end of their report, she mentally shifted gears and put on her war face. "Acknowledged. Thanks, guys," Orsted replied. Quickly strolling through her display, she rearranged the layout to show a map of their region of space, with their position relative to the asteroid, Mars, and Earth. She also included a table displaying the status of the ship's propulsion and weapons systems, the remaining fuel level, and other pertinent pieces of data. In the coming hour, she would need to simultaneously monitor 4 subsystems at once to maintain the most efficient attack vector while ensuring that they can go home in one piece. Every little bit of information would be needed to perform the job to her exacting standards. "Lieutenant, could you please open the line at Ares 2? Orsted requested over the internal comm. "Link established, ma'am," she replied. "Ready when you are." Kristen smiled at the speed and efficiency of the younger officer. She was always in step with her own actions and seemed to intuitively know what would be needed next. That was one of the main reasons why she had made such a good technical officer and weapons specialist on missions such as this. "Thank you," Orsted said. "Open the line." A brief click emanated from her speaker as the systems switched from their own ship's communications network to that of both ships. She had been flying these craft for as long enough to recognize the faint sound and knew that she was live without needing to confirm it on the display screen. It was one of the things that she enjoyed about flying with the military and space programs. Each new ship had its own quirks and defining traits that you would only learn through hundreds of hours of in-cockpit experience. Some things just couldn't be taught in a classroom. Ares 2, this is Ares 1, radio check, she called out through the comms. She tried to pour a little extra enthusiasm into her tone to set the mood for the six-person team. It had been a long flight trapped in their seats without moving, and she needed them to be wide awake and ready for action. Are you all ready to save the planet again? A round of cheers, hoots, and hollers echoed throughout the two ships as the five others answered her question in unison. They had run similar missions in the past, and had thought of nothing but this one for the past few weeks. They were ready and excited to put the new ship and their training to the test. Smiling behind the breather of her helmet, she said, "I'll take that as an affirmative." Hitting mute on her controls, she took a deep breath and attempted to settle her nerves. Things were about to get crazy, and she wanted to be present for her team with a calm demeanor, focused attitude, and convey a sense of command. While she had very few doubts about how this would go, she always planned for the worst, but didn't want to relay that mentally to the team. They were counting on her to be their font of courage and direction. Thank you once again for giving me your past week to sit up in the cockpit and fly out to the middle of the solar system. You all know why you're here and what this means for the safety and security of the planet. Let's run through the mission checklist, confirm operational status of your controls and monitors, sucker punch this thing out of the way, and get back to our homes as soon as possible. Agreed? A round of "yes ma'am" replies came through the comm. They were ready. She knew it. They knew it. Let's do this, she thought to herself. Lieutenant Smith, she began, indicating her navigator behind her seat. How's her flight book and ETA to Camulus? Well, the lieutenant spent the next few minutes rattling through the flight vectors that they'd take to the asteroid. She leaned back in her chair and moved her helmet. She felt gross after sitting in this same damn seat for weeks on end and needed to feel her best for the coming battle. Working with her limited space available, she adjusted the straps in her flight suit harness and confirmed that her breather system was charged and functional. She applied another dose of deodorant, tossed a caffeine pill down the hatch, and sprayed some dry shampoo in her hair. Quickly working it through, she rigged the ponytail in the back and slipped the helmet up and over her head. Clipping the helmet back into the connections of her gorget, she ensured that the suit was sealed and would maintain an internal pressure if needed. Dropping her visor and activating the seal, she nodded to herself in contented confirmation that her oxygen levels were good and the pressure was maintaining Earth nominal parameters. Cracking her neck from side to side, she settled in. She was ready. Just as she completed her self-care routine, Lieutenant Smith concluded her navigational presentation, and it was the Major's turn to again speak. She didn't necessarily need to hear the updates, as she already knew them, but she made it part of her SOP to make everyone feel included and provide a chance for team members to spot holes in the plan and comment accordingly. She had been on far too many teams where the little people felt left out, or their voices weren't being heard, to allow herself to make the same mistake. It was important for each team member to feel involved. Thank you, Lieutenant. Lieutenant Laughter, what do you have for us? Lieutenant Susan Laughter was the technical specialist on the Major starship and was in charge of external communications and onboard weapon systems. While she previously trained on all projectile, explosive, and energy-based weapons in the Space Force's arsenal, she had thankfully never had to use any of them off-world in a real battle. The Earth had yet to be contacted by hostile alien forces, at least as far as her chain of command sought to inform her, but it was only a matter of time until that would become a reality. She wasn't that naive in believing that they were completely alone in the universe. For now, her mission objectives were protecting GPS systems, space-to-base telescopes, and NEO repulsion, the latter of which brought her here today. Thank you, ma'am, the sergeant replied. Capacitors for each ship's respective repulsor cannons are charged to 100%. They're currently set to a 5% drain allowance prior to recharging to minimize load cycling on the systems and prevent burnout of the electrical subsystems. They'll be held to full 10 minutes prior to attack until fired to ensure operational readiness. Propulsion systems are directly integrated to the cannons and will be ready to actively counteract the repulsor forces during the exercise. Checklist complete. All systems are green and mean and ready to engage, ma'am. Excellent. Thank you, Sergeant, Orsted commented. Ares 2, run combat entry checklist and confirm when ready. Adjusting her gloves and continuing to refine the layout of her controls while subconsciously keeping track of the time spent by Ares 2, she had barely counted 60 seconds before the anticipated reply came through the speakers. Ares 1, Ares 2 is a go on all systems, ma'am. Ready when you are. Excellent. Thank you, Orsted replied as she quickly processed the information pouring out of her screens and ran through a mental checklist. Concluding that all was well and they were ready to engage, she hit the button for the comm once more, pressing the button which allowed for long-distance transmissions in the process. While all text and verbal communications were stored on the individual ship's flight control computers, they were not instantly conveyed back to base. She wanted to alert her Major General that this mission was to begin and keep him apprised. Ares flight, combat entry checklist complete, 10-minute warning. Stay focused, stick to the plan, and follow my lead. Good luck. No cheer came this time from the other 5 members of the dual flight crews. They were seasoned professionals and had already donned their game faces. Running through her systems for a 5th time now, she checked each and every one to both prepare herself and calm her nerves. She might say that she had OCD, but if so, the obsessive element had kept her alive more times than she could count so far. Over the next 9 minutes, Major Orsted watched as the once tiny brown and gray speck in the distance slowly transformed itself into the visage of a looming monstrosity of planet-killing material. It was one thing to read about it, thousands of pages of observations log, scan data, and calculations made by the scientists back home, but to see it with your own eye was entirely another thing. Over the past few months, the asteroid had been remotely scanned and observed by several key locations back on Earth. Between the long-distance radar station at Watney Base, the massive VLT-1 recently constructed on Mount Albert, and orbit perturbation data coming in from a government-controlled observatory, the team at Colorado Springs determined that Camulus was approximately 95 kilometers in diameter and upwards of 1.8 metric exatons. That put it just a hair over the theoretical size of the asteroid which had created Chicxulub crater in Mexico, the one that possibly killed off the dinosaurs. Nav, she said, gently turning her head to look over her shoulders at the 2 women behind her. Begin your scan of the asteroid, please. Weapons, fire the probe when ready. Orsted linked her navigational controls to that of Captain Hallberg's ship so that he could see everything that she was doing in real time. As she brought her ship up and over the hurling mass of rock, he did likewise, and they began their respective scans from opposite directions. Feeling a light thud vibrate through the frame of the ship, she could see a quick succession of flashes as each ship fired a drilling probe at the asteroid. Little more than single-use laser drills with onboard mass spectrometers, the probes would bore as far into the asteroid as possible before their capacitors drained, analyze the dust coming out of the hole, and then transmit the information back to the ships. The 2 navigators would compile the data into linked computer systems to generate a model of the asteroid's material composition to accompany the previous geometric scans. It only took another minute for the system to finish its work and determine the pertinent values for the asteroid. Ma'am, data incoming in all consoles, the lieutenant said. Looking down at her monitor, she saw the information come through. Subject, Camulus asteroid. Test time, 45.03 seconds. Test date, 04 April 2049, 9:05:02. General shape, spherical, non-standard. Mean diameter, 96.3 kilometers. Mass, estimated, 1.73 times 10 to the 18 kilograms. Material composition, silicon oxide, 45%. Iron oxide, 31%. Calcium oxide, 11%. Aluminum oxide, 10%. Titanium oxide, 2%. Other, 1%. Wow! Captain Hallberg exclaimed as Major Orsted was still reading the information on her display. Well, not exactly a data-heavy response. Everyone knew what he meant. This thing was big. Rehashing the plan in her head, Orsted focused on the numbers, her equipment, and what they needed to do. Linking the telemetry data for Camulus, overlaying the flight paths of her 2 ships and the asteroid itself with the live reference path showing the asteroid's anticipated position upon passing by Earth on her secondary display monitor, she began working the controls and put her craft into motion. This thing was massive. They were moving insanely fast, and physics would prove to be their friend or worst enemy in the next few minutes. Ares flight, combat checklist, she spoke quickly and calmly into the comm channel. Ares 2, we will run point on all maneuvers, fly in parallel and follow our lead. Swinging the craft around the asteroid while maintaining a distance of 100 meters, she oriented the ship so that she was flying sideways. Pointing the nose of the Silverhawk perpendicularly to the trajectory of Camulus and their 2 ships, she slowly eased them forward toward the rock and closed the distance. Nav, please monitor the flights of all 3 bodies and continue to update the trajectory model as we push. Yes, ma'am. Sergeant, she began, mentally running through their previous exercises and calculating the right approach based on the newly updated data. On my mark, fire the repulsor at 10% power and aim for the center of mass of the asteroid. Increase by 10% on each successive mark. Roger, Wilco, the sergeant curtly replied. The major could tell by the sound of the woman's voice and pronunciation of the word ma'am that she was gritting her teeth. Up until now, the officer had a fairly easy job and didn't have much to do besides sitting still, eating, and running communications connections. The next few minutes, however, would fall mostly onto her shoulders. With a quick swipe of her free hand, the Major flicked several views off the side of the display and filled her main screen with the only two that mattered to her right now, their flight path and the Repulse's power level. Hovering her hand over the drive system's thrust vectoring controls, she took a deep breath and started the show. Mark. She could feel the vibration from the repulsor cannon directly below the cockpit hum through her seat. The ship gently drifted in reverse as the repulsors pushed the craft away from the massive rock. She deftly responded with an increased thrust to counteract the force of the cannon and attempted to overcome it. Allowing her eyes to momentarily dart down to her monitor, she saw that they were averaging 22.5 kilometers per second laterally to follow the asteroid, repulsing 0.4 meganewtons, and counteracting it with 0.4 meganewtons from the primary ion drive. Ares 2, please confirm a repulsion force of 0.4 meganewtons and 0.4 meganewtons of drive thrust. Confirmed. Nav, what are you seeing? No observable effect on the asteroid's trajectory, ma'am. She wasn't surprised. The thing was massive and would take a lot more than 10% power of a comparatively tiny ship. It was time to roll up their sleeves. Lieutenant Laughter, Mark. And so the process went on for the next 30 minutes. Both ships would increase their output of the repulsor cannons by 10% power, and the pilots would bump up the dry power to counteract it. Slowly but surely, the two starships poured more and more energy into the rocky crust of Camios in an attempt to alter its course. Periodically shifting their position relative to the asteroid, they tried to even out the thrust to minimize the chance of imparting rotational spin to the mass. The last thing that they wanted to do was add in another variable factor to screw with their computer models. Watching the monitor tick up to 80% power after the last incremental increase, the Major started to get nervous. An optimistic person by nature, she did have her realistic limits. Sergeant, how does our trajectory look? Asteroid passed by altitude projected at 193,105.23 kilometers, the woman replied. Still no discernible effect. The Major said out loud, not meaning to. She was getting anxious and beginning to doubt the success of their mission. It wouldn't do well to allow her crew to see this side of her. She needed to be their rock to lean upon. Let's keep going. Set up a program to monitor our position, distance to home, and the remaining fuel reserves. Add in a 5% buffer and set to alert us when we reach the point of no return. We'll keep pushing as long as we can to head back before it's too late. Acknowledged. Gripping the stick, she kept the ship on target and flew in parallel to Captain Allberg. Looking out the transparent glass bubble surrounding her, she watched the slender blue-white cones of pulsating waves of ionized energy pour out from under her feet as they shot out of the mouth of the cannon. Wave upon wave of innumerable charged particles hammered away at the rocky surface, gently kicking up an increasingly larger field of hovering dust lazily orbiting the asteroid. She wasn't aware of any possible adverse effects that this byproduct may have on the cannon, but she reminded herself to make a note of it in a report on the way home. She would have plenty of time to think on this later. Looking down at her display, she saw that they were at 100% nominal output for the cannons. Flicking the icon for the flight path projection program vertically on her display, she sent the view to her heads-up display over her left eye inside her visor. Watching the readout manually without bothering the lieutenant, she saw that their projected distance from Earth had yet to change. They needed to push the thing just a little harder, and it would budge. She could feel it in her gut. They were almost there. Sergeant, we need more power. More power, Captain! Sergeant Laughter exclaimed incredulously from several feet behind her, with just a hint of comically derived Scottish accent. I'm a weapons expert, damn it, not an electrician. Closing her eyes and gently shaking her head, she took a deep breath before responding. She could feel the seat shake just a little as the lieutenant behind her stamped her foot, laughing. It had been a while since they'd all heard Susan's nearly perfect Scotty impression, and it was a well-needed diversion from their current mood. That's major to you, Sergeant, Forstead said, with a laugh, clearly unable to hide the fact that she enjoyed the humor. Please bring the cannons up to 105% nominal power for 10 seconds, then raise to 110% afterward if our temperatures and energy consumption figures still look good. I don't want to cook our systems, but we need to try that. We need to try everything that we have at our disposal, and then bug out as soon as possible either way. She watched as the power output increased on her monitor as the sergeant quickly complied and followed her orders. A noticeable spike in fuel consumption appeared on the dial as the ship burned through more hydrogen than normal to satisfy the requested demand of the thirsty cannon. The cannons could obviously fire more powerfully than their defined nominal rating, but that value was established to ensure the longevity of the system and efficient use of the starship's resources. It wouldn't do to blow out the reactor and lose our ion drive this far from home just to fire the cannon. This wasn't a life or death scenario after all. Continuing to watch the monitor, she saw the output jump from 105 to 110%. She wouldn't admit it to the crew, but she was getting nervous. Years of hard work with the ship's design engineers and fabrication teams told her that she could operate the cannon at 110% for 30 seconds or so, and maybe even 115% for a few seconds, but anything beyond that would fry their electrical systems. If this didn't work, they'd need to pack it up and head home right away, or else they'd wind up drifting through the solar system until backup could arrive to rescue them. Cannon at 110%, ma'am. Acknowledged. Thank you, Sergeant, Orsted replied. Give her another 5 seconds, then bump it up to 115. Ma'am? She'd normally tear a subordinate a new one for questioning a direct order, but she let this one slide. She wasn't entirely sure it was the right thing to do either, but they needed to try it. Do it. Yes, ma'am. The vibrations coming through the fuselage and into her seat steadily increased as the monitor showed the power output jumped to 112, 113, 114, and finally settling on 115%. Like a cat watching leaves blowing around on a blustery day, Major Orsted's eyes darted from screen to screen as she attempted to take in every detail available to her eyes. She was on the lookout for high temperature spikes, abnormal fuel consumption, vibrations coming from things that shouldn't be vibrating, and most importantly, any observable concerns with their life support subsystems. While they were wearing space-rated flight suits with built-in oxygen generators, they would only survive for approximately 30 minutes on their own. If something sprung a leak out here, they'd be frozen and suffocated long before anyone could find them. Nav, how's the projected flight path look now? Major Orsted inquired of the woman seated behind her. While she could see a summary of the path and data on her screen, the lieutenant's station featured a more highly detailed view and denser data output. Are we having any calculated effect on this bastard? Nothing of statistical significance so far, ma'am, Lieutenant Smith answered. I'm seeing a projected offset of 1.31 kilometers away from Earth in my current model, but that's still within the anticipated plus or minus 1.5 kilometer tolerance range. The data or calculations may be skewed, and we're not actually having any impact. We need more time under repulsion power or a denser data set to be certain. Understood. She muted her microphone and allowed herself to audibly sigh into the lonely space within her helmet. This lack of progress was frustrating for her, and she didn't want to show it. It would not do well to allow her team to join in her dismay. They had trained so hard and brought the best tech along for the ride, and yet they still might have failed. While the people of Earth were currently safe from this asteroid, what would they do with the next one if this methodology didn't work? Ares 2, she said, switching the ship-wide comms back on. How's your ship holding up? See anything promising come through your sensors? Where there was previously the gentle hum and static coming from the line from multiple microphones being turned on, there was now an audible silence. The captain had probably muted his team's mics to do a quick internal sit-rep prior to answering. She found it a little annoying as a superior officer, but she had done it plenty of times in the past with her own team. It was better to have an accurate information and answer once than to guess and bungle a report, especially at a time like this. The ship is strong, ma'am, he answered after a moment, but we are seeing our reactor temperature increase at a rate of 1.26 centigrade per minute. Nothing to be concerned with right now, but we'll need to back off as soon as it keeps up. Acknowledged. Maintain power output of 115%. Standby for orders. Understood, he replied, holding at 115%. Woohoo! Recognizing the voice of the lieutenant behind her, Major Orsted could feel the blood pressure instantly spike within the veins of her arms. She was both surprised by the unexpected exultation as well as the flood of thoughts entering her brain. Was it something good? Something bad? What? Nav, what have you got? I think it's working, ma'am. Explain. The system is refreshing data every 5 seconds, applying the projected flight path's distance from the surface of the Earth, Lieutenant Smith explained. My last report to you was the distance increase of 1.31 kilometers. Well, good. I wasn't excited as it was still within the program's tolerance range. The next reading showed a distance of 1.35 kilometers, then 1.39 kilometers, and now it's at 1.43 kilometers. I think it's working. Thank you, Lieutenant, Orsted replied with a noticeable tone of relief in her voice. Ares flight, dropped to 110% power output for 20 seconds, 105 for another 20, and then drop to 100% afterwards. Let's try a little harder without voiding the warranties on our new toys. Keep pushing for 5 minutes, and then we'll reassess. Roger, a chorus of replies came through the comm. Orsted watched the readouts intensely and allowed a tentative smile to creep across her face. This was going to work. 5 minutes later, after evaluating the current position of the asteroid, its projected flight path, and the status of each ship's systems, Major Orsted gave the command to cut the power to the cannons and head back to Earth. They had managed to push the asteroid far enough so that it would pass by Earth 2.4 kilometers closer to the moon than would have without their intervention. While this probably wouldn't be enough to save the planet should the asteroid ever find itself in a direct center of mass collision, it could prove to be useful for close call scenarios. Regardless, this was an important and productive test. En route to the third rock from the sun, she punched a terse text message only into our main console. Mission success. 2.4 kilometer push towards moon, heading to base, awaiting command. 15 minutes later, after her message had been sent through the vacuum of space to Earth, received, read, responded to, and traveled back, she received the following. Congratulations. Return to base for a well-deserved shore leave. Fly safely. Saving the reply and switching menus, she filled her screen with the map showing their way home. Hitting the talk button on her controls, she joyfully hooted, "Put on your yoga pants, ladies. We're going home." And that is the conclusion of Act 1 of Eggs in Two Baskets, my science fiction novella set just a little bit into the near-distant future. And I hope that you enjoyed what I read and that you'll be reading it yourself within the short near-distance future. If you do read it, please leave me feedback on Amazon, Goodreads, Barnes & Noble, or any other site of your choosing where you like to leave reviews and discuss books. I appreciate feedback. Feel free to write to me. Follow me on Twitter and Facebook. And I look forward to talking to you soon. All right. Thanks for your time and have a good night. Bye.